AI is accelerating application development and modernization in many ways, but developers are just ramping up their use of this technology. This episode of Utilizing Tech includes Paul Nashawaty, who focuses on application development at the Futurum Group, and he's discussing this topic with Allyson, Klein, and myself. Learn more about the use cases and the practical application of AI in modern application development. Welcome to Utilizing Tech, the podcast about emerging technology from Tech Field Day, part of the Futurum Group. This season of Utilizing Tech is returning to the topic of artificial intelligence, where we will explore the practical applications and impact of AI on all areas of enterprise technology. I'm your host, Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day, and joining me as my co-host this week is my good friend Allyson Klein. Welcome to the show, Allyson.
Hey, Stephen. It's great to be back.
It's always nice to have you here. You've always got something good to say. And this week, we are talking about the impact of AI on application development.
I can't wait for this topic. One of the things that I've been following is just how DevOps teams and application teams are looking at AI as a transformative force in the way that we think of everything about application development and deployment. And I want to learn more.
Yeah, I can see a bunch of different ways that it could impact us. I mean, number one, AI co-pilots are helping developers write better code. I'm also, of course, seeing a lot of AI assistance in terms of a lot of the back end processes, everything from source control to documentation and of course there's the whole operations aspect of it, and then there's all these machine learning and AI modules that are being integrated into applications, and developers are being called on to implement that stuff. One person that I know that knows a lot about this topic is my colleague here from Futurum, Paul Nashawaty. Paul focuses on modern application development. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Allyson, for having me here. It's a really exciting time, really exciting topic to be talking about, app dev and application development and how AI impacts it. So my role, as you mentioned, Stephen, I am the practice lead for the app dev practice at Futurum Group. So I focus on application modernization and application development.
And if you're interested in this conversation, Paul and I are actually going to be hosting a application development focused Tech Field Day event. The first ever App Dev Field Day will be the end of May. We would love to have y'all tune in and join us for that conversation. But I guess kick things off, Paul. You're an analyst. You're focused on this space. I don't think there's anyone who's better positioned to talk about this. Tell me how AI is impacting modern application development.
Well, Stephen, AI is impacting modern application development in a number of different ways, right? When you look at it, it's, there's acceleration of modernization practices. That modernization is top of mind for every CIO, right? When looking at what's happening with the infrastructure, whether it's heritage environments or heritage applications that are moving to cloud or moving to cloud native environments or cloud ready environments, all of this really requires that faster kind of movement and approach to basically modernize, right? And when you ask these CIOs what their number one challenge is, it really does come down to skill gap issues, and then is complexity, and there's challenges. So AI is being used to address some of these challenges. So, but it's interesting because what we also see in our research is even though AI is really at the kind of the early stages of assisting these modernization efforts, we see that only 18% of organizations are using AI in their production applications in our recent research. So it's an interesting kind of place, but we also see that 27% of respondents to our survey are indicating that they are trying to use and understand how AI can help with these efforts.
I can imagine that IT organizations are being bombarded with requests right now from different lines of business saying we need to integrate AI into how we do X. Um, what do you think is the challenge for organizations to actually move? Is it skill set gap? Is it tool gap? Is it infrastructure gap? Or is it all of the above?
Yes, from my perspective, all of the above, right? And of course, that's an analyst response because I can say that, right? It really does impact all of the different aspects of the development cycle. I think the way I would look at it, Allison, is frame it up into how is AI being used to help address these projects, right? And when I look at it, I think of it in the context of faster code creation, or I think of it of improving code. These are use cases that the developers are looking at. Generating documentation, right? That's a great use case for AI. And also customer satisfaction. Right? We've also seen that chatbots have been in play for a long time, but chatbots are not always the best way of kind of delivering. But with AI and Gen AI, we see that that customer experience is really being improved. Actually, we see that 35% of respondents are using AI to do so. So that's an interesting kind of perspective as well. Um, to actually pivot a little bit, I would also say from a tech perspective, AI is also looking at ways of integrating these new LLMs, right? But this isn't new, right? Applications as you modernize and you move forward, organizations have spent a lot of time scrubbing and building their data pools and their data lakes that they've already have today, right? They don't want to give that up. So attaching those data lakes to their new intelligence or new AI models, that's incredibly important for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, Paul, that was one of the topics that we discussed at AI Field Day specifically, was this idea of using LLM as the user interface, as it were, and connecting it with structured data sets on the back end to basically surface existing data better and help serve customers by leveraging hard structured data sets. I think that that's absolutely something that we're going to see more of in the future. Obviously, data lakes and data warehouses and data lake houses and all these kind of things, that has been part of the modern application world for quite a while. But I think that AI is really going to accelerate that because people are so worried about what LLMs might do. Um, whether no matter where these things are being used, though, is that a concern for application developers in terms of using AI technology and the fear of hallucination and all that?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you think about the data structures that are being used, a lot of these heritage applications are being encapsulated as systems of record to be used for modernized approaches. So you'll build new front end applications, maybe with a React application in the front end that attaches to the existing system of record in the back end. What's incredibly important is the right calls to make to those data sources, so you have the right information that's presented up to that application. If that information is not presented up correctly, you have a couple of issues. One, you could have hallucinations, as you mentioned, right? But you also have the issue of incorrect data or silos of data, right? And you're not having a holistic view across your data set. That is very bad, right? Because now you have a partial data set of what you're looking for. And for years, organizations have spent time and to build these systems so they have a holistic view of their organization. And now to put an AI front end on it, is they don't want to break their existing systems that they have in place. So that's important to kind of think about. The other side of it is attaching your back end LLM or your private LLM to your private AI to your new systems or new modernized applications. It's incredibly important that you don't like commingle that with public information, because now you run the risk of sharing your IP externally, right? And if you want to share, that could be run into a whole slew of issues. So there's also that. And then the final point I'll make is ethical concerns and governance concerns. You want to make sure that you're in compliance within your organization. So if you're running checks and balances against your AI, you need to be able to make sure that you're in compliance and governance within your own organizational needs. I mean, we saw recently an airline that basically went out and did some weird things that happened, and they didn't honor those things that happened. They said they blamed it on the AI. Well, that's not acceptable, right? You can't just say, "Well, my business did this; it used AI," and blame it on the AI. That doesn't work. So that's one of the things that organizations have to think about.
What do you see the LLM providers that are training these massive models on public data providing in terms of tools to integrate LLMs as quickly as possible? And Are there more tools needed in this space to enable DevOps teams to take advantage of the tools?
Yeah, I think if you look at the tools and the stacks that are in place, businesses are about accelerating their application release cycles, right? So the CI/CD pipeline is that infinity loop of moving the application and making sure you have that agile development process. What we see in our research is 24% of respondents in a 378-person survey indicated that their organizations want to release code on an hourly basis. Yet only 8% were able to do so. And part of the reason behind that is because the release cadence has to happen very quickly. So when you're looking at the DevOps tools, these learning models that are in place, the applications that are in place, everything I mentioned earlier about governance, compliance, and regulation all needs to be taken into consideration before you push it out the door. And we haven't even mentioned security, right? So if we look at security as another factor, that's another area. The other thing I would also mention is testing. In the CI/CD pipeline, we see testing as a major factor. That's an area that many organizations will say, well, we have an agile software development methodology. We have new sprint releases or code releases every 2 weeks. We'll just address the bug fixes with the next release. However, that's not a really great example because you're using your client base as your test bed. And that's the fastest way to lose those clients.
Yeah, I think that that's a real good point, Paul. I remember you bringing this up to me as well, that testing is one area that AI can really accelerate things because it can not just follow a test plan, but basically create adaptive test plans based on the whatever is happening, whatever's being produced, right?
Absolutely, and I was just on a briefing yesterday with a client that is actually potentially coming to the AppDev Tech Field Day event, which is going to be exciting. But that client focuses specifically on accelerating test cycles for the DevOps release cycle, and that's exactly what organizations are looking for. That we typically hear the term shift left in the context of security, right? You shifting left from day 2 to day 1 and day 0. What testing does is shift left the testing cycle from day 2, from the release side to the build and earlier in the cycle. So that is an area that I'm seeing a lot of growth in the vendor world of accelerating the testing. So focusing on day 0 and day 1, so the build and release side, versus on the operational side after the fact.
And it occurs to me that testing is one of those areas like documentation that, let's say, developers have not always been that enthusiastic about. So I think that they may be enthusiastic to have an AI solution to help with that.
Oh, for sure. This is one of those areas that uh, you're trying to shift your skilled resources from reducing those redundant tasks, and testing is one of those things where if you're putting in a test harness, an AI solution to remove those redundant tasks from that cycle, it really helps, not just helps the accuracy of putting out the application faster, but also the enjoyment of the developer's job, right? The developers want to innovate. They want to build new code. They don't want to live in maintenance mode. That's not a fun place to be, right? And living in that mode and testing is just, it's redundant and tedious. So automating that and having AI as a way to kind of get you there, actually what we're seeing is 36% of respondents in our recent survey indicated that shifting skill resources from redundant tasks, from shifting those skill resources away from redundant tasks to use AI to take care of it. So it's definitely an area that organizations are looking at, even in the early stages of AI.
I've been hearing a term called retrieval augmented generation quite a bit in conversations. Can you just define that and break that down and fit it into what we've been talking about?
Absolutely. So when we look at RAG, retrieval augmented generation, we look at the combination of using predictive and a generative AI to kind of produce the results that you're looking for, right? So basically, combining those data sets and the results to accurately deliver what you're trying to produce using AI gives you a up to date set of content and resources to produce that AI solution, or that I should say that output that you look for from a content perspective, but have a real live backend kind of support to it.
When you think about where IT organizations are, you've painted this incredible picture of all these things that need to be thought of. You've also stated that a low percentage of IT organizations are fully actioned on all of these items. What do you think it's going to take to get over the chasm, if you will, and move DevOps teams into the mindset of AI centric application delivery?
Yeah, Allison, I really like that question because I think about it in the context of maturity. Uh, there's going to always be stages of maturity for organizations where they're going to take their approach and how they deliver based on their own needs. So, for example, I mean, when we look at organizations that have DevOps teams, they have DevOps engineering teams as well as platform engineering teams, right? Do they have these different isolations? Are they utilizing SREs for their whole complete site, view and such to have a holistic view across the entire organization? Or are they really just an IT shop that focuses on the line of business with nothing in between? That's a maturity model right there, right? So it depends on the maturity. But to your question, all the things that we talked about so far up until in this conversation today, all the things we talked about are areas that organizations are touching, regardless of their maturity. They may be doing it better or worse, but they are touching it. And what AI does is allows for it to be faster and more reliable to get it done. One of the things that I believe that there's a challenge that I hear quite a bit from the organizations, not just the vendor side, but the organizations that are running it, is there's a lack of confidence in the solutions that are in the market. So they want to have stronger confidence from vendors that are producing these solutions. The other side of it is as I mentioned, CIO's focus is application modernization, right? Need to modernize. Whether it's infrastructure or application, they need to modernize. When you put in a solution that says, hey, we've got this AI solution that's going to help you do that, they look at it and go, this is another resource I have to put behind this. So how complex is this? How much work do I have to put in? Do I have to hire another body? Do I have to look to a service delivery partner to do this? There's a whole number of factors here. So my advice to vendors in this space is to provide the easy button, right? The big green button that says go, right? If you can give that frictionless deployment of how to get DevOps teams more productive and increase that velocity, even though developers really don't like to use the word velocity because they're doing as much as they can. DevOps teams do want to get the code out the door faster because that's their business KPI. And if you can have that easy button to do so, that will help accelerate those goals.
Yeah, I definitely am seeing that as well. It seems like the best positioned vendors, and frankly, I have to say, some of the product vendors seem to be kind of left behind because they're not approaching it this way. But the best positioned ones are the ones that are leaning into integration points with other products and other frameworks beyond the scope of their product. And even folks that are leaning into compatibility across the same segment, and ones that are very, very partner driven. If you look at the companies that are most successful in modern application deployment and development, it's the ones that are very, very friendly, open, and partner driven. And frankly, that's a good way to be anyway. Do you agree with that?
I do, because when you look at, we talked about skill gap as a major challenge, right? When you look skill gap as an issue, Stephen, a lot of times organizations will say, well, how can I accelerate this? I need to hire more people. Well, even if they can find people to do the job, it takes about 9 to 12 months to get that team productive to deliver. So that's pretty much outside the window of what they're looking for. But that partner ecosystem that you mentioned, that's where the service delivery partners come in and can accelerate those business objectives and goals quickly. That's when you start working with digital services partners or service delivery partners to get the goal done. One thing I will say is, with we saw a big acquisition that occurred in the virtualization space recently. There was a reduction in the amount of products that they offered. One of the things I like about that approach is if you give a bag of bits to organizations, you've increased the complexity, which means that you have, you're not going to accelerate their time to value. You're not going to accelerate their time to deliver these products. So even if you're working with a partner ecosystem, you have to put it together. Um, Reducing the amount of bag of bits or the amount of pieces to make it work so it's a frictionless deployment, even for those service delivery partners, is an advantage for a lot of vendors.
I'm so interested to see how this rolls out. And Stephen, I'm so glad that you brought up open because it really does beg the question, how is open source and open data? I mean, open data is, the new topic that enters into the fray with this. How will they reshape industry? And how are organizations going to lean towards open source to take advantage of shared capabilities? The announcement that came at AI Field Day 4 around Gemma is just an example of a large leading AI company taking what DeepMind has created and providing it out in the open source community. Do you see a lot of action in that space, Paul? And how are broader organizations responding to things like Gemma?
Yeah, well, I'll answer it in kind of twofold. One, the open source community is, I should say this, organizations in our survey that responded to our recent survey indicate that they want to work with vendors that sponsor open source projects. But 68% of those respondents want to work with vendors that they want to use open source, but they want commercial level of support to go with it. They don't want to go at it alone. But the open source piece is incredibly important because it's hardened and tested, and it's in the tested by the entire community. But to Stephen's earlier point, it's also very much part of that partner ecosystem. There's that integration across the entire environment. So that piece is incredibly important. With regards to Gemma and the approach there, I certainly see that as the step in the right direction. I think that's where the organizations are going, especially when you start adding in development efforts and building code, and then putting those practices in place of ethical AI and such. Those all kind of play into that whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that the Gemma announcement by Google, as mentioned, I mean, the importance of that, well, number one was that it brings, good models to bear for people who are developing AI applications. But more importantly to me is that they're releasing it in a way that's ready to use. So you've got Kaggle notebooks. It works with, Hugging Face, and it works with, NVIDIA GPUs, and the kind of things that developers are needing to integrate with it. It's just all there. And I really like the fact that Google announced that, and I'm really excited to see so much other open access out there for these models, because ultimately, I don't think that application developers are going to develop their own LLMs from scratch. I mean, do you see that happening, Paul?
No, actually, I don't. But I do want to touch a little bit more on your comment there. One of the things around, providing that frictionless approach, providing those templates, so to speak, is important, but not to get too much into the nuts and bolts and weeds. When you start looking at this, the path, like if you're dipping your toe in trying to get going into these AI solutions and such, do you use a CPU or a GPU? Like, what size do you use to get going, right? That's an important kind of decision. Now, a developer's not going to know that, right, or think about that too much. They're going to think about it in the context saying, what do I need to kind of get myself going, right? But the underlying pieces, well, what if the infrastructure only has a large number of CPUs, and can those CPUs be used for AI initiatives? Sure, they can, right? Are they the best? Probably not. Depends on what level of you're growing. But that's an architecture decision that's made, and it's also transparent to the developer, which is important because the developer wants that invisible infrastructure. They don't want to know what's happening underneath. They just want to know they have the resources to go. To your question, Stephen, on LLMs, no, developers have a lot of constraints or a lot of pressures on them, especially when you're looking at refactoring or building net new code. If you're building new, or you're trying to say refactor, if you're refactoring, you have a lot of work to just get the business logic right? So if you're trying to build the business logic and whatever database in the back end that's there, datasets that are back there, the API calls to connect into it are important, right? Which leads to a whole different conversation about use cases and calls and cost, especially if you're going from cloud to on-prem, et cetera. There's a whole bunch. That's a whole different conversation, probably for another hour-long discussion. But for the point of this discussion, when we look at developers using and building, I don't think they're building their own LLMs to do this, because they're using their own data sets. They may have some test labs and some test cases for that. Sure, that makes sense. But again, for organizations listening to this discussion today, they really need to make sure that the organization has compliance, governance, and rules in place so their proprietary information does not get out into the public domain.
Acceleration seems to be a common theme. And one of the things that I think about in this is watching how quickly the large AI players are moving. I mean, the speed of innovation is something after 25 years in the industry I have never seen before. One question that I sit with is, are enterprises going to be able to keep up with this pace? And do you see enterprise perspectives changing to actually start implementing technology at a faster rate, or do you see them staying with what tends to be more of cautious perspectives in terms of the implementation of technology?
Allison, great question. What we see in our research is organizations are tasked, specifically development organizations, are tasked to do 2 to 3 times more work in application development today with half the staff they had just a few years ago. So, to your comment, the acceleration of rapid code development is just ramping up, and it's like a hockey stick. And when without the automation tools, like an Ansible or Terraform or something that kind of allows you to do automation, um, organizations that are not using automation are going to fall behind. And the challenge that I see, Allyson, is it's not so much about not necessarily just about a competitive advantage. It's also about a security impacts. Things that happen to applications that happen really rapidly, if organizations cannot adjust and make changes that quickly, that's an impact to the business's integrity, right? So now you have either it's bug issues, or you have security breaches, or you have just maybe downtime, whatever it may be, but you have the customer impact, and that's what's going to happen.
So it seems like 2024 is shaping up to be the year of AI integration into the enterprise. And I can't wait to see the use cases that come out of that, because I think it's just the amount of opportunity for innovation across lines of business, across industries. I think we're going to be breathless in what we see. I want to know if 2024 is actually the year, or do you think it's going to take a few years for this all to materialize, Paul?
Yeah, Allison, great point. I see it as this way. Just to kind of wrap up what we've been talking about here, 2024 AI is in its infancy, right? Especially when you look at the impacts to organizations. AI is not new, right? We've seen that organizations been around for many, many years. The actual practical use cases of AI have been accelerating at the end of 23, going into 24, and it's taken off like a rocket ship. And this is where, I don't think I don't know. I think that the key is in the ignition and it's going, right. I don't think you can't, shut that engine off. It's going. So I think that we're just in the early stages right now, especially with rapid code development, with testing, with the CI/CD pipeline, with developers. But just overall, as we talked about in this discussion today, the impact and release of what applications are trying to do, what organizations are trying to do with application development is incredibly fast, and it's only going to get faster. So I just see AI just taking off and helping with those solutions, but it's an enabler. It's not the end goal.
Yeah, we've already seen so many new initiatives being announced. At GTC, everywhere we go. AI was obviously a big focus at Mobile World Congress earlier this year as well. We certainly expect to see a lot about it at Cisco Live and HP Discover and all these other events. It just seems like there's no stuffing the genie back in the bottle. And not only that, but these things are going to be, they're going to be out there no matter what. Another aspect, without bringing up too many new topics at the end here, another thing that occurs to me is, the emergence of the AI PC. I think that Apple and Microsoft are going to be integrating much more support for AI on the desktop, on the workstation. And that is inevitably going to pull application developers into using this technology simply because it's right there, it's at hand, it's in the operating system, it's in their favorite development platform. They might as well use it. And to me, it's an exciting time to watch Certainly, I don't think that this is going to slow down anytime soon. In fact, I would say, Paul, I think that when you rerun your survey, maybe next quarter, you're going to see very different numbers. And I can't wait to read that report from you.
Absolutely, Stephen. I would agree absolutely with that statement.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Paul. It's been great to catch up with you. I am privileged to be able to talk to Paul all the time, and as I said, we'll be seeing you at the end of May at AppDev Field Day. Tell us a little bit more about where we can continue the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a lot happening with this discussion. We have a lot of research briefs and research notes that are out on futurum.com. But you can find us both on social, in our LinkedIn and X, as well as from our platform. And we'd love to continue the conversation on those social venues, as well as you can reach out to me at thefuturumgroup.com.
Allyson, how about yourself?
I'm Allyson Klein with the Tech Arena. You can see me publishing about AI and all sorts of topics from cloud to edge on thetecharena.net, and connect with me at Allyson Klein on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. And for me, you'll find me at here on Utilizing Tech. We're actually getting a new season ramped up. We've already even recorded some of the episodes, amazingly enough. And so we'll be launching a seventh season of Utilizing Tech very shortly at the end of this one. You'll also see me, as I said, at AI Field Day, App Dev Field Day, Cloud Field Day, all the other Field Day events that we're doing. Just go to techfieldday.com to learn more about that. And of course, you can catch our Tuesday podcast and our Wednesday news show to keep up to date on everything that's going on. Thank you for listening to Utilizing AI, part of the Utilizing Tech podcast series. You'll find this podcast in all of your favorite podcast applications, as well as on YouTube. If you enjoyed the discussion, please do give us a rating and a nice review. We would love to hear from you as well. The podcast is brought to you by Tech Field Day, home for IT experts from across the enterprise, and by the Futurum Group. For show notes and more episodes, head over to our dedicated website, which is utilizingtech.com, or find us on X, Twitter, and Mastodon at Utilizing Tech. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week.